From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. It's Independence Day in Brazil, and just a month away from the most uncertain elections the country has seen since the return to democracy. Marginalized communities are coming together in cities all across the country under the motto, "Inequality causes violence." People are mobilizing against growing inequality, against violence, including Thursday's attack on a presidential candidate, and for Lula da Silva's rights to be free. Let's hear more from our correspondent Ignacio Lemos in Sao Paulo and Andre Vieira in Rio.
I'm standing in Paulista Avenue, where a protest named The Cry of the Forgotten has started. This protest is held by historically marginalised communities who have long denounced that the country's independence did not take into account their people. Part of this event is also a demonstration asking for the release of Lula da Silva, despite the fact that it was just yesterday when the Supreme Court quashed any hopes of Lula's defence team and of his followers by deciding that the former president could not run for office. Demonstrations like this are taking place all over Brazil, asking for democracy and non-violent solutions to the ongoing crisis. In particular, talking about the stance of far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro, who was recently stabbed during a rally. They say that while unfortunate, the candidate has frequently advocated for violent solutions to the country's issues, and this march stands against violence in all its forms. We continue from the streets, accompanying the excluded peoples of Brazil. On September the 7th, the official independence of Brazil is celebrated, but social movements have been making these demonstrations for 24 years to denounce the fact that Brazil is no longer an independent country, and that since the coup, Brazil's dependence on international interests has intensified. This year they are denouncing that inequality is the cause of growing violence. They also reject the attack against the right-wing presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro on Thursday, and also the effects that the coup has had on the country. They demand the return of democracy in Brazil through clean and honest elections. So the social movements are here in the streets of Rio de Janeiro, standing for the excluded communities of Brazil.
Thank you, Andre, for your report. And Sandra Quintela, author from the Institute of Alternative Policies for the South, spoke with our correspondent at the march in Rio.
This movement of the excluded is a way to say that Brazil is not yet an independent country. September 7th is Brazil's Independence Day, but we are still very dependent on big capitals of the international bourgeoisie. So this movement of the excluded is to demand our independence, and now even more because we are in a complex situation in Brazil, because we still don't know who are responsible for the murder of Marielle Franco, with the imprisonment of Lula da Silva without any evidence, and right now with the attack against a presidential candidate. This may open a wave of violence, and we totally reject what happened yesterday with the candidate Bolsonaro, even though we do not share his extreme right-wing political views, but we reject the violence in any form. We are here to say that Brazil will find a way to solve these issues. Our motto is "Inequality causes violence," and we believe we should stop the system of privilege. Our motto is so relevant because Brazil is becoming more and more an unequal society ever since the coup in 2016. Poverty has increased in these 2 years.
And the people of Rio de Janeiro have also been coming together to begin the reconstruction of Brazil's National Museum. The museum burned down on Sunday, destroying 200 years of priceless artifacts.
The building that housed Brazil's National Museum survived the fire that destroyed 90% of the artifacts inside. Nearly 20 million pieces spanning millions of years of existence were lost. The academic community has promised to continue reconstruction efforts.
We didn't just lose Brazilian history. We lost artifacts representing millions of years of human history, like fossils, indigenous artifacts, and ancient insects.
One of the biggest losses was the oldest human fossil in the American continent, Egyptian mummies, along with countless archaeological and geological collections that told the history of the continent's original people.
This was an attack on our memory, on our history, on the original languages of Latin America. It's very serious, one of the worst attacks on the history of the indigenous people.
dos povos originários.
The National Museum is part of the University of Rio de Janeiro, which has faced large budget cuts since 2015. They've only become worse since President Michel Temer came to office. He cut the museum's budget by nearly $20 million.
It's not just the museum. The whole country is being affected by this perverse logic of budget cutbacks. We have started to mobilize, trying to show our reality, to inform people to fight these policies. To destroy Rio's university is to destroy the nation itself. It's destroying our future.
One of Michel Temer's first measures was a constitutional amendment that froze public investments for 20 years, greatly affecting culture and education.
I think there has to be political compromise so we as a nation can revoke these measures, because education, health, culture and even science are being eradicated.
The Brazilian people will not hold anything back in their efforts to see the museum be rebuilt. They also say they will take to the streets to demand that the constitutional amendment that froze public spending for 20 years be repealed.
Desde Rio de Janeiro, André Vieira e Sebastián Soto, Telesur, Brasil.
In Argentina, teachers and public workers are mobilizing against the ongoing economic crisis. Our correspondent Edgardo Esteban has more on this.
Protests have been going on in Argentina against President Mauricio Macri's economic policies. The government has failed to propose any substantial solution to the workers' demands regarding salary increase and improved basic services. Argentinian teachers and public workers will mobilize next week to ask for real solutions from government. Also, today universities from across the country took classes in the streets to emphasize their demand to pay hike as the economy continues to suffer with an inflation of 40%.
And the student strike in Mexico is ongoing and sees no sign of resolution, following violence against two students sparked the action on Monday. Here's Pablo Perez with more information from Mexico City.
Emilio Aguilar studies in the school behind me. He's one of the two injured kids after being victim of assault while they peacefully protested outside the university director's office on September 3rd. These violent actions made this school and more than 40 others start the strike, which began on Monday. There has been no action taken by the administration to calm the situation down. This motivated thousands of students to march on Thursday at University City. A recent report stated that 18 people were dismissed, including the security manager of University City. They were allegedly part of this violent, repressive group. However, this may still not be enough to calm down the students' concerns, because these kind of problems are not new. They stated that there have been shootings, robberies, and threats against the students as well as teachers for many months. President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador gave a speech against violence against the students. He said that this cannot happen, but that it must be punished according to the university rules, in order to respect its autonomy.
Thank you, Pablo, for your report. And Mexico's current government may be on its way out, but it continues to come under scrutiny for its exorbitant spending. Leader Enrique Peña Nieto has starred in several TV commercials, and his government has racked up a $2 billion bill for these self-promoting ventures.
En estos siguientes 12 días que tendré la oportunidad de dirigirme a los mexicanos.
The media campaign for the sixth and final report of the Peña Nieto government will be one of the biggest. Over 12 days, radio, television, and social media ads will feature him outlining his administration's accomplishments. In the videos, the outgoing president thanks Mexican citizens for supporting him during his term. He also uses the platform to talk about the White House scandal, the increasing cost of fuel, and the forced disappearance of 43 students in Ayotzinapa. A study conducted by the Center for Analysis and Investigation reveals that his administration doled out $2.5 billion on publicity during its 5-year run. That's twice the generous media budget Mexican lawmakers allotted it for 2016 alone. Yet the president's image barely ever improved.
With these ads, he's trying to gain empathy from the people, but there is none of that to be found. This campaign will have no effects whatsoever in how he is perceived. If anything, it will have adverse effects.
The latest polls show that 78% of Mexicans feel that the country is worse off than when Peña Nieto's term began.
There were many important events during his presidency, but all reforms and every expectation ended in disappointment. Some of his work was even well-intentioned, but the people never saw any significant change. And if anything, things are worse.
Amid these concerns, President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador has already announced that the budget for media and advertising will be cut.
The government's publicity budget will be cut by 50%.
It's part of AMLO's proposed austerity measures. He says this will save Mexico over $26 billion per year. That figure represents about 10% of the country's gross domestic product.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
We are African. Culture and tradition is what we are born with.
We might be apart in terms of distance, but we are always together.
We need to love ourselves. Back to Africa.
Sunday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Ecuador must now pay possibly billions in compensation to oil giant Chevron Texaco. The International Court of Arbitration ruled in favor of the company. It's found Ecuador guilty of violating a bilateral agreement and withholding justice from Chevron. That treaty required state oil company Petroecuador to assume responsibility for damages by allowing indigenous communities to sue Chevron. Chevron has spent years contesting allegations that it is responsible for environmental and social harm to the Ecuadorian Amazon. The company was accused of dumping billions of gallons of toxic materials into the Amazon in the 70s.
The ICJ's verdict did not establish an amount that the Ecuadorian state must pay to Chevron. The appraisal stage for damages that must be paid to the company will start in 90 days and could last for months. Within those same 90 days, both the state of Ecuador and Chevron must present official letters outlining their claims in regards to the monetary sum. Today's verdict concludes that the Ecuadorian state is responsible for having violated Article 2 of the bilateral agreement for investment protection between Ecuador and the United States.
And for its part, the Ecuadorian government has blamed former President Rafael Correa for this ruling. A spokesperson for President Lenín Moreno has said that Correa spent millions of dollars of public funds in his campaign to aid indigenous people in their trial against Chevron.
The previous government paid over $10 million in national and international media campaigns in support of this case. They made the people believe that international celebrities support that cause, when in reality they were being paid to show support using public funds.
Denise Herrera has more from Quito.
Hello, yes, an international court ruled in favor of the oil company Chevron and declared Ecuador responsible for violating a bilateral investment treaty on those years. This oil company Chevron at Texaco said that Ecuador allowed indigenous people to sue them for environmental environmental damage. This decision was taken after these oil companies started a legal process against Ecuador in 2009. Under this, the current government declared and said in an official statement that if the former government interfere in this case, they will find a responsible. We should remember that former President Rafael Correa started a very strong campaign against these oil companies. So now Ecuador will have 90 days to resolve this situation, and also we'll know how much money it will have to pay. That is all we have for now. Back to you at the studio.
And Telesur English recently published a documentary short featuring those affected by the oil spill. You can watch the entire documentary on our website. Political parties in Bolivia are grappling with news of a new electoral law that introduces primary elections to the country beginning in January.
Opposition parties are shocked by a new law that for the first time in Bolivian history will establish primary elections. There will be elections to elect presidential and vice presidential candidates for each political party ahead of the national election. The Electoral Court has been working on the law for nearly 2 years.
These primaries will take place in January, and only those registered to a political party will vote. The Bolivian people will not take part in these, and over 40 million Bolivianos will be spent. This is a huge disaster for democracy.
I strongly reject this new law. This is government manipulation that seeks to destroy our political parties.
The new law states that political parties must register a minimum number of members. They must also define any outside political alliances before January's primaries.
Anyone who wants to be a candidate for president is bound to comply with this new law, which is highly favorable to democracy. They will have the benefit of being recognized for months before the presidential elections. They will be able to present the proposals for nearly a year.
The new political organizations law also reworks government financing for political parties. It expands guarantees for women to become candidates and sanctions those who switch between political parties for personal gain. Primary elections will be held in January, and presidential elections are set to be held in October 2019.
A former Chilean bishop has been named a suspect in 2 different investigations into alleged sexual abuse cover-up. Juan Barros is accused of protecting his mentor involved in abusing teenage boys over many years. The other allegation against him has not been identified by the police yet. This case is the latest in a series of church facilities raided by Chilean prosecutors, seen as one of the most aggressive investigations into the abuse scandal in the world. Trinidad and Tobago's unions have gone ahead with the one-day national strike. However, while some schools were affected by teacher absenteeism, there are reports that the unions' call to rest and reflect generally went unheeded by public and private sector workers. In a brief statement, the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturing Association thanked workers for ensuring productivity was not derailed. The association says it was business as usual this Friday. Union leaders met with the Prime Minister on Thursday to discuss halting the closure of the state oil refinery.
Tomorrow, if it was not on, is on more than ever now.
Yes.
Tomorrow is on. Tomorrow is a day to rest and reflect. Rest and reflect, and may I say at this point, that long before the Petrochin issue became an issue and an announcement, tomorrow's activity was declared.
No, the government is not overly concerned. That is a call that the union leaders have made. Their members will decide what they want to do. If they want to adhere to the call, we are ready, and that is the position of the government.
Political and social organizations in El Salvador are reacting to the report of the sexual abuse of 3 young detained migrants. They had been separated from their families and held on the southern border of the U.S.
Deputy Minister for Salvadorans Abroad, Liduvna Margarin, held a meeting with members of the Gender Commission of the Legislative Assembly. She revealed details about the sexual abuse girls from 12 to 17 years old suffered in Arizona detention centers.
The sexual abuser has already been arrested and he is now before the U.S. courts. He is a sheltered social worker.
President Salvador Sanchez Cerén attended the launch of the National Strategy for the Integral Development of Minors, a proposal to defend minor rights in Salvador. Sanchez Cerén expressed his concern about the migratory situation and the separated minors.
We have to look after the rights of our citizens who migrate, especially to the children and teenagers. That's why we are developing an intense plan to defend the people affected by the zero-tolerance policy by the U.S.
With the possibility of repatriation of the abused girls, the appropriate institutions are ready to provide psychological care.
Workers of National Council for Children and Adolescents welcome the children, evaluate them psychologically and emotionally, and determine whether the child is ready to go back to his or her family.
Authorities say one of the abused girls is already together with her family in the U.S. Now, they will also verify the conditions of all minors who are still in detention centers.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur. With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. A Palestinian teenager has been killed and over 200 have been wounded by the Israeli army in the Gaza Strip. The 17-year-old Palestinian Bilal Mustafa Kafaja has been shot in the chest by an Israeli sniper, according to health officials. At least 167 Palestinians have been killed and 18,000 injured by the Israeli forces since the Great March of Return protests started 5 months ago. Chief of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency has lamented the United States' decision to withdraw fundings from the agency operating in the Palestinian territories. Calling from Jerusalem, UNRWA chief said the decision surprised him as late 2017 meetings in Washington showed positive feedback over their work. The U.S. was the biggest donor of UNRWA, but has only paid out a fraction of what it originally pledged for the year.
I very personally deeply regret the decision. I think it is a form of politicization of humanitarian funding which should have been avoided. I say this because I'm very clear about the fact that the decision is not related to our performance.
Protesters have attacked and set the Iranian consulate on fire in Basra, Iraq. As the latest episode of the deadly demonstration starting on Monday, protesters forced their way into the building. They condemned the political influence the country has over Iraq. Residents say corruption, the lack of power, and drinking water also triggered the protests. At least 10 protesters died since the clashes broke out. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said rebel militants in Idlib, Syria, should surrender in the interest of civilians. Speaking at the Syrian summit hosted by Iran on Friday, Putin urged rebels to lay down their weapons. His comments come as Syria prepares for a major offensive in Idlib to oust the al-Nusra Front.
The main task at this stage is to banish militants from the province of Idlib, as their presence there poses a direct threat to the safety of the Syrian citizens and residents of the whole region.
And Israel is constructing a 30-foot-high wall along the border with Lebanon to prevent its enemies from infiltrating the country. The wall will be equipped with steel mesh and high-tech surveillance systems. So far, around 7 miles have been built, but that will eventually extend to 80. Lebanon has denounced the wall as an intrusion of their territory. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.